What we're doing in the project, we're interviewing people from both sides of the communities about life before the Troubles and after now. And we're all just learning how to set up the cameras and conduct interviews with them.
So this project's obviously about the peace polls and the prospect of them coming down and hopefully at my time. I like to think so. But that's basically what it's based around, is the fact that there's barriers between Protestants and Catholics, but I think while doing this I found out that the barriers are much more mental than physical.
Mostly enjoyed all of it. Just about when the peace was and all first from up and back, when all the conflict was going on, the Troubles, and just hearing everything that had happened when we were younger, when we were kids.
The peace walls are just a physical projection of our own thoughts.
The thing I enjoyed the most was like meeting new people and going out and hearing people's stories about when we went and recorded them.
The interviews and editing as well, because they were both really good to learn and fun to do.
I enjoyed the actual interviewing a lot because talking to the people I talked to were very interesting. I talked to like Tommy Holland, who was able to tell me a lot about the Ballymurphy massacre and stuff, and they both had and Father Des Wilson. But they both had really nice, good stories to tell. Both very interesting stories, and it was just really interesting to find out about their lives and what it was like for them growing up.
Because it's good for young people to know what happened on both sides, and there was good and bad on both sides, and it just wasn't the one side that done everything.
Working with other people on this project is definitely changing views on what the people say that both communities are like, because a lot of people say that the people from the Shankil are really, like people that aren't really nice, and same with people here. It's definitely not like that there.
I think I've learned that both communities still have a lot of resentment towards each other.
I learned that didn't know much hatred both sides had back in the day. Like, I wouldn't have it now. I would never have had it anyway, because I never really brought up like that.
The barriers between Catholics and Catholics are much more mental, but they're present in the minds of people who went through the Troubles, which is obviously understandable. But I think I think it's going to be a lot easier to move on once their generation passes and our generation moves in.
I grew up on the Ballymurphy Road, and as well as the work that I've done in youth work and peace building, I've also written about my childhood of growing up in West Belfast during the Troubles. I do vaguely remember before the Troubles that I remember actually walking down the Springfield Road with my mother by the hand to see my granny, who lived over in near the village in the Donegal Road, and I do remember that there was, you could get a bus between the Shankil that crossed the Springfield Road and over towards the falls and things like that. I remember that you just could go anywhere. My experience was that my parents and a lot of the adults, they tried to make life as normal as possible for us, and my parents started a youth club in the church in the corner of the Ballymurphy and West Circular Road, and it was a disco every Saturday night. It was called the Westie Disco, and there was about 400 of us, and we all packed into the Westie Disco every Saturday night. And it was a way of parents like mine keeping their children off the streets and safe during the Troubles. I was aware of all the terrible things that were going on around me, and sometimes you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and there were some, you witnessed some terrible things. For most of the time it was in the background, and you just got on with life. You sort of thought it was normal to be, you sort of thought it was normal that there were bombs and shootings all the time, because you didn't know anything else. Growing up and seeing the worst things that had happened around me, I was very committed to seeing if we could try and make things better, and I thought for me the best way of doing that was to get involved in community development and peace building and things like that. The problem is there's still a lot of mistrust between the two main communities. I mean, because we don't really know each other, and those barriers have been there for a long time. I mean, in the early days they were put up to kind of protect communities from the violence and from attacks. But we've had a peace process now, and that hasn't really been happening to a really serious extent for many years now. And but the problem is we're so used to being separated for decades that people just don't know each other, and you get this sense that there's people on the other side, but you're not sure if they can be trusted. So if the walls were to come down, people aren't sure whether they would be safe. And I suppose it's really important that any talk about a future when the wall's coming down, the people who live right beside those walls need to feel that it's safe enough to do that. And I know from talking to people, some people do think it could be safe enough in the future. Some people are very scared and don't think it would. But I think there's a whole series of conditions that need to be in place, before it would be safe enough for the peace walls to start to come down. But there's a lot of brilliant youth organisations and community groups who are working really hard to break down those barriers. And I believe the peace walls will come down in my lifetime. I think it's inevitable that it will happen. The Northern Ireland that I grew up in was a dark place in terms of all the violence and the hatred and all that we were living through. I remember bringing home my mother, and my first time I had to bring home my mother a drawing from school in P1, and she kept it, and I still have it. And my first drawing coming home from school in P1 was of a riot. And I've all these lovely colours of the crayons, in P1. But I've got like barbed wire and soldiers and fellas in masks and petrol bombs. And that was my first picture in P1. So I was really delighted when my kids brought home their first picture. They were drawing normal things like rainbows and butterflies and wee houses.
Before the Troubles, the Ballymurphy was a brand new estate. It was just being built. You had a lot of fields around here as well. There wasn't as many houses as there is today. Our ministers, Deputy First Minister, the First Minister, they're saying they're hoping to see the walls down in 10 years. It's not about the physical, it's about the mental. We need to have people feeling safe and secure and wanting the walls down. It's about whoever lives along where the interfaces are. We need to break down our sort of mental attitudes out of the peace walls. As I say, the peace walls are physical, you just can't take them down. Some sort of fortification against any type of violence or trouble or incidents happening. It's hard for you to let that go. And it's about trusting your neighbour and getting to know your neighbour. When you ask about the future, you look at the devastation of the past. I know there's still people looking answers. We had the Springhill massacre. And we had also the Ballymurphy massacre. Ballymurphy massacre happened in the 70s. There was 11 people killed in the Ballymurphy massacre. There was 5 killed in the Springhill massacre. So that needs to come out as well. The truth needs to come out about those killings as well. We talk about interface walls, how we break them down. Like I said before, it's not the physical, it's not about the brick and mortar, it's about the mentality, and it's about how people are safe and secure. So the answers to a lot of questions out there from both communities, what happened to their loved ones and how they died and why they died, all that needs to be answered. So it's all about the truth. That's how you break down walls. It's the walls inside our heads and our past. So to move into the future, we need to clear up the problems of the past.
I lived in Ballymurphy when I was a child, and Ballymurphy was a mixed area. There was more Catholics lived in the Ballymurphy area, but there was Protestants. I think round towards maybe 1968-69, things sort of started to change, and with the riots then you would have had Protestant families moving out, but there was still Protestant families living in the area. In fact, up until a few years ago, there was still a Protestant family lived in this area. And again, there was still probably some sectarianism. I can remember as a kid, we're just standing here really at the foot of the Black Mountain, which when you were a kid, I mean, that was your playground. You know, you were up the Black Mountain during the school holidays, you were up the Black Mountain every day. But really, during the school holidays, and especially on a Sunday, you had to wait. There was certain times where you couldn't go up the Black Mountain, you know, because you would have been stopped and asked your religion. 9 times out of 10, you would have been attacked. And that, I mean, I'm going back to maybe 1967, 68. Ever from I moved to Ballymurphy, from I was a child, everything has always been a battle a day, really. Every single thing that we have in this area, we've had to fight for it. It's been a long, hard struggle for people, but people have been determined, and we are reaping the benefits of it really now. I lived here for 18 years, and there was no play facilities here whatsoever for young children. After a long battle, which was probably 10, 12 years, and the result of that is the play park just to our left-hand side. I'm very proud to live in this area. It's the community spirit that's in the area, the determination of people. What I love about this community is that they always come together. There's always that determination of people. There's sort of the will you want to deliver for your community, you want to deliver for yourself, for your children, for your grandchildren, and it's that determination that keeps you going. The walls are there because they went up during the Troubles. And I know things have changed. I know that quite a lot of young people would mix together, and you have Protestant children would come over to the nationalist side and nationalist kids go over to Springmartin, Highfield, and they all have great friendships and all. I would love to see the walls coming down, but I don't think it's actually the right time.
When you look back before the Troubles, for instance, you had a Protestant community in New Barnsley and Moyard area, and Protestant community in here. You had Catholics who were living here, so there was a lot of to and froing between the areas. Only 40% of the area was occupied during the conflict because people didn't want to live on an interface area. It was a mixed area. Roughly about 10% of the people that lived in the area would have been from the Catholic background. I actually moved here from the Shankil area, and I hadn't been used to grass and greenery. So when I moved here, I thought I'd moved into the country or something. For a young person, it was fantastic life because you had the mountain to use during the summer. You had the Glen Cairn where you could have went during the summer. It was a great community to live in. When I was released from prison in 1991, when there was talk about the ceasefires coming up, I then went and got myself an education to get involved in community development. Basically, I see that I've been working from a community basically most of my adult life, so getting involved with community work was just the next step. I think the interface walls are still there. It's a bit like a security blanket for people. People aren't happy enough at the minute that they're not sure that the peace process is actually working, and etc. But I think that there are more people now going across the peace walls, etc. Hopefully there will be a case when the peace walls will be taken down. Hopefully that the peace process will continue, that there'll be more working along with people from beyond the peace walls and from both sides of the peace walls, and that we will have interdependent communities where people will be going through the peace walls for work, etc., going through the peace walls to socialise, etc. So the peace walls will no longer be necessary. I can see that happening now. I can see it happening now specifically with young people. I can see it happening now with older people as well. But there are still a lot of issues that are happening that raise sectarianism now and again. But I believe that in the future that people will learn to live together, and we will have, as I said, interdependent communities.
Before 1969, they lived cheek by jowl. Cupar Street, before the barricades went up, was sort of dividing line. There was still main enclaves of nationalist and unionist areas, but there was more mixing, especially at a younger level, played football together, etc. But once the conflict started in 1969, things became more polarised. There was less mixing, less integration, especially when you had a peace wall dividing the two communities. It's a well-known fact that a disproportionate number of people were killed on either side of the peace line in both North and West Belfast. So it was a very dangerous area to live. The area was heavily occupied by the British Army. There were a number of bases in the area. So growing up in that era, as I did, the British Army came in when I was 16. You've lived that throughout your life, basically got used to it, and that was normality. Sounds crazy, but that was normality for people of my generation who were growing up in this area. The two communities need to come together and discuss the reasons why the wall was there in the first place, and are there still reasons, because there's still tension. People still feel ill at ease when the walls will be taken down. There's underlying issues which need dealt with, like contentious breeds, etc. There are serious social and economic problems in the area, so we need to deal with the underlying issues as a prelude to taking the walls down. We recognise that the government has brought out an initiative, building communities together, and part of that initiative was a process involving dialogue between both communities to deal with the underlying issues, so we can reach a position whereby people are happy enough and comfortable with taking the walls down. They've been there, remember, for over 40 years. I think we have a bright future. It's in demographic terms, a lot of young people. I don't know the percentage figures. Good education facilities in the area. The problem is there's no job prospects. With training centres in the area, and it's heartbreaking to hear some of the people involved in training young people that while they can give them a necessary skill set, there's little or no employment opportunities for young people. So we need to focus on that, employability, them acquiring the right skills, and at the end of the day there has to be jobs at the end of the pipeline for young people to take up, etc.
There was always an undercurrent because the conflict or the previous conflicts had not been decided, and there was a kind of limbo land, and underneath the surface was there was always that type of tension that would or unresolved issues such as the border. Well, I was very young when the trouble started. I was only 15, 14, and it was no choice of whether you wanted to be involved in the conflict. That you were right in the middle of it, so you became part of it. So a lot of young people ended up involved in the conflict at that particular time. Something like 30,000 people from both communities went to prison, and there was a lot of issues when they came out which they needed resolved. So I got involved with APIC, which is an ex-prisoners centre, and we help prisoners readjust into society, particularly on the release after the Good Friday Agreement. During the conflict, there were a necessity for to have those peace walls and interfaces to protect people from each other, and the fear factor that people had. There's no reason why they can't come down in the future, but if they're going to come down, they need to these areas need to be regenerated, because there's no work in these communities, and there's no facilities along the interfaces, so we need to rejuvenate those areas before people can talk about bringing walls down. This site, for instance, was the old Mackie site, the old foundry, and Protestant workers, and the Woodville factory over across the street, across the road there. Thousands of people from the Shankil and Highfield, Springmartin, all over the place would have came here to work. So every morning when the hooter went for people to start at their work, you would have seen thousands of people coming here and going down the Springfield Road. But this area would have been a very busy area of industry. I think that the government need to invest more in the community. They need to invest in these areas. They haven't invested for 40 years since the walls went up. Yes, we want to see the walls down, but we want to see a proper plan to bring the walls down and not just take walls down and walk away.
I remember the Springfield Road. My grandparents lived up the Springfield Road, and in those days it was considered a kind of a swanky area. It had huge big trees. Everything looked lovely up here. And when I come up to the mill to work, as I say, it was tough work, but the area in those days was totally different to what it is now. People lived and trusted one another, and people got on together and in many cases, people just got on with life. If there was a death in the street, everybody helped. If it was a birth, everybody helped. If there was trouble, everybody helped. My earliest memory of that time would be my mother was a cook, and my mother used to make soup. And she said to me, would you go down and ask Mrs. So-and-so, can she use some of my soup? I've made too much. I went down, the soup went down the street, the pot came back up empty. That went on for weeks, and I couldn't figure out why my mother couldn't. If she made a mistake one week, why was she making it every week? It was only when I grew up I realised my mother was making a meal for the family down the street. Their father was unemployed. It wasn't charity now. They were helping us out by eating our extra soup, and that's the way life was in those days. Well, I worked here on the Springfield Road, which technically was on the Catholic side of the peace line, even though I came through from the Shankil. But it was tough. There were days when we had bombs, there were days when we had dreadful shootings, there were days when we were out of work because of the troubles. It was tough, but nonetheless, once you went inside the mill gate, it was a different community. It was a mixed community, but it was a community within a community, and we worked together to try and make work, because at that stage, that was the only thing we had to hold on to. The walls were built as a temporary measure, and unfortunately they've lasted a long time, which is probably par for the course in Northern Ireland. Eventually the walls will come down, maybe not in my lifetime. It's up to you young people to do that. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the walls could go tomorrow, because it's the walls in people's minds I would be more interested in than brick walls. I have to say, the Cupar Way walk, which has become a very big tourist attraction, it might never come down, because it has brought jobs to the area, it's brought people into the area. But by and large, I think most of the peace walls could be removed. The sad thing about Northern Ireland is, even though we've came this far, we're still building peace walls. Now, we've got to get away from that idea. I think we've got to mix the communities earlier so that we learn that the other side doesn't have horns. And that's why I really, really believe that mixed schools is the way forward. I'm not decrying schools, Catholic schools, state schools, grammar schools, they all do a good job, but children and young people don't get mixed up until they go to university. There's a lot of disturbance going on now in the Protestant community around marches, around flags, issues like that. I'm hoping my community will settle down and come to what it once was, a very proud community. It still is, but I think in many ways we have lost that sense of direction. I would like my own community eventually to come to be at peace with itself. It's a tremendous difficulty for people in, say, officialdom to understand what we're talking about when we talk about community. I remember in the mid-70s, even way back, there was a great movement towards community education. And we very soon found that the biggest difficulty was that nobody was agreed on what community was, and nobody was agreed on what education was. There's an education project that we've got, trying to get education learning for people in the way that they want it, rather than the way that somebody else decides they should have it. So that's what it's about, and trying to create work. And also, there's a lot of emphasis today on health and getting rid of stress. So that's what it's been about for the last, 30, 40 years or something. When I came here first in the 70s, I never realised the amount of poverty that there was. And I was furiously angry, and I still am. So the main thing, as far as we were concerned, was to try to get a peaceful situation in which we could create prosperity. I think that the barriers certainly will be removed. They all go in time. My view of it is that given the kind of situation where you have a reasonable amount of prosperity and where people take a hand in their own affairs, I think people say take down those barriers, whether they're mental barriers or physical ones. I'd be very optimistic about it, provided that what I always call the genius of the people is allowed to flourish. It's there. And people want to corral it. They want to put people into boxes, and they want to make sure that nothing is done except it's done by them, by themselves. Whereas a local community is vibrant, it's inventive, knows how to survive, do everything. There's nothing that you can't do. I think with that formula, it could be okay.